constantly blocked. Most of us have felt the pain of the you don't have access error at exactly the wrong moment. And so this session is really about avoiding that. The goal is not to memorize every checkbox and permissions, but I want you to leave with a mental model and a few patterns that you can apply back at your own organization. I'll connect what Adobe documents very well, by the way, at a feature level into an operating model that you can basically explain on a whiteboard. So before we jump in, a little about me. I'm Sarah Masters. I'm a senior product manager at General Motors. I work in MarTech, but I kind of live in the intersection of data, activation, and governance. I'm personally responsible for AEP as a product at GM, not just as a tool. So that means I care a little bit more about how it actually affects the people and how they experience it day to day. But prior to GM, I've spent time on the agency side. So I have I've seen both sides of the let's move fast and try things and the let's be safe and be compliant mindset. So a big piece of my job here is translating between legal and security and engineering and marketers and getting everybody to agree on how AEP should behave. So let's talk about the plumbing that makes everything work. When teams start with AEP, and you may have experienced this yourself, get very excited about the visible pieces, like the cool stuff, schemas, policies, audiences, journeys, profiles, the things that like the marketers want to use. Unfortunately, though, access and permissions and sandboxes, that unglamorous side of things, sometimes gets handled reactively. And it's usually because something broke in production or someone can't do their job. The irony is that this plumbing layer ends up deciding whether the platform feels smooth and reliable or fragile and high friction. So this is a really important piece. It's very foundational to setting up AEP. So today I'm going to walk through a way about thinking about access control that supports experimentation without turning your security team into a villain. I'm going to try to answer 4 main questions for you. First, how AEP thinks about access and sandboxes under the hood. Second, how to design roles based on what people really do in the platform versus just copying your org chart. Third, how to separate experimentation from production without ending up with a zoo of sandboxes. And then finally, how to layer in governance so it protects data without freezing everyone in place. So how does AEP actually work under the hood? Here's kind of the mental model. Good decisions start with accepting AEP's mental model instead of fighting it. So big deep breath in. This is it. I need you to just walk away with this. Whether you like it or not, this is how it works. AEP revolves around 4 building blocks. First, we have product profiles. Then we have roles and permissions. Then there's sandboxes, and then ABAC policies. And you can kind of think of it as a sequence. Product profiles decide who's allowed in. Roles define what they can do. Sandboxes decide where they can do it. And then the ABAC adds that extra filter on which the data they can touch. So once you see access issues through that lens, it should make this much easier, especially if you have to diagnose why something is failing. Okay, so let's start with product profiles. These live in admin console, and they kind of act like the bouncer at the door of a club. So if someone's not in the right product profile, they don't just have limited access. They don't see anything. So AEP doesn't exist for them. So no amount of clever role design can ever rescue a user who was never added to the right profile in the first place. So in practice, I treat product profiles like table stakes. They get people into the club, but that's not where the real design work happens. Did I miss a slide? Sorry. Nope. Okay. So then we get into designing roles and permissions. This is where I see most people stumble. The instinct is to mirror your org chart with permissions. So for instance, at General Motors, we had a product manager and a product analyst, and we used every other title that we had in our org chart and started building roles and permissions around that. It's okay. You can do that. It works, but it usually leads to like dozens of bespoke rules that no one can safely change later, and then no one remembers who needed what. It can get very confusing. It doesn't scale. So instead, what I recommend is designing capability-based roles. What can this person do in AEP versus what is their job title? And by the way, users can hold multiple roles. AEP will union the permissions together. So that's easier to reason about than one giant admin role, which I'm sure some of you know about too. So I'm going to go through some core roles that tend to work. This is by no means prescriptive. You don't have to do exactly this. I just wanted to give you some ideas so you can start thinking about how this could work in your company, in your organization, based on the people who are actually using AEP. So the first role is what I would call an anchor role. You need a platform owner or an architect, someone who's accountable for AEP working end to end. This role typically owns the connective tissue. They own the schemas, data sets, identity, metadata, ingestion sources, and then often like key governance features like privacy service. So like the big meaty stuff. Then you might have a sandbox administrator. By the way, this could sit with the platform owner or architect, or it could be split out. What really matters is that you have someone who's deliberately responsible for creating, resetting, and decommissioning sandboxes. And keeping that responsibility narrow is intentional, and it prevents the oops, we reset the wrong sandbox. Those incidents can be surprisingly common. So it's important to really make that responsibility narrow. Then you might have a data engineer or a data modeler, and that role would focus on the shape and the flow of the data rather than platform-wide control. So they would often need access to design schemas, manage data sets, wire up the ingestion pipelines, and they would probably be doing that in non-production environments. So they might be working more in dev and in UAT. What I've seen work really well is giving them a lot more freedom in development and staging, and then keep the production access tightly scoped and change controlled. That's the outcome you want with data moving quickly without every schema tweak becoming like a production risk. An audience and journey builder role. This is where the platform really comes to life for the business. They're the ones that are turning the data into actual customer experiences. So they'll need strong access to profiles, audiences, journeys, destinations, but they don't need to rewire the underlying data model. They don't need to change schemas. So just give them the access that they need to actually create the marketing campaigns. And then lastly, you might have an analyst or a read-only consumer. They need to see things, but maybe not change them. Honestly, I'd probably give my leadership this role. They can get in, poke around, but they can't mess anything up. And this would probably just be in the production sandbox. They don't need to see all the messy experimenting that we're doing in development. So you don't have to start with everything. Start small, continue to expand with this. Here's just some practical tips. Start with view permissions. Do a lot of this before you start granting managing permissions. This is where like you'll actually start to hear teams getting blocked, and they're going to tell you, no, I need to actually be able to make changes here. And then you can slowly add in those managed permissions. If you go ahead and give everybody managed permissions right off the bat, it's going to be a lot harder to pull that back and turn that into view. So it might be conservative, especially if you're coming from a role where everyone is basically an admin, but I'm telling you the discipline will pay off later. It'll save you a lot of heartburn. Your future self will be a lot happier, especially if you have to debug like permission issues. Okay, sandboxes. So if roles control what you can do, sandboxes control where that work happens. I know there's a temptation to assume that more sandboxes equals more safety, but what I've seen is that it sometimes equals more overhead and confusion. So for most teams, a simple layout is enough. You need a place to experiment, a place to validate and end to end, and then a place to run like the real experiences. And the goal here is that everyone can answer the simple question at any point. What environment should I be in for what I'm doing right now? So here's a common pattern. You would have 1 or 2 development sandboxes, a single staging or UAT sandbox, and then 1 or more production sandboxes for live data. So in development, intentionally messy and disposable. You're going to try things, make mistakes, reset as needed. This is for all of your experimentation to see what works. And then in staging, this is where you're going to prove that the entire flow behaves as expected with realistic, but maybe not production data. And then production is reserved for live customer data and experiences. That's going to be deliberate and traceable with your changes. So at General Motors, we actually started with just a development and production sandbox. And it was working okay, but as you probably know, when you're building out a data model, it's not going to be perfect every time. You do a lot of validation and experimenting, and you find that, oh, actually, I can't personalize this way with the way that I've modeled the data. I have to go back and make fixes. And if you've enabled it for profile, you can't delete that field from the sandbox or from the schema. So after seeing the development sandbox get exactly how I expect it to be, very messy, we added in that UAT sandbox so we can do that validation. I can bring my users in, they can do the testing and feel really good about it before we promote to production. So if you're not using 3 levels of sandboxes today, that's okay. You can always add it. It's no big deal. And really, you want that development sandbox to be disposable. If it's not, then it's doing too much. So know that you can always replace it. Know that it can be messy. I've got fields in my schema that say do not use, but they're not there in UAT and they're not there in production. So that's where I did my experimenting. And the other thing I want to call out here is that in dev and in staging, you can decide to use mock data to test it all out. You could use your actual data if you want. At General Motors, we're not doing mock data, but I am not onboarding my entire data sets into dev and UAT. I'm instead using a small sample size. I don't want to blow these sandboxes up with a bunch of data, but I do need enough to be able to kind of test and prove out that my theories work. Okay, that leads us to governance and ABAC. So ABAC is your labels and policies. This is your second line of defense, especially for sensitive or regulated data. The catch here, though, is that you don't want to label the world on day one. That's a fast path to complexity and policy fatigue, and your users are not going to be happy with you. So instead, maybe start with a short list. Just highlight the truly sensitive domains and design labels around how they should be handled, not who owns them. So for example, maybe you're at a healthcare company and you want to allow an internal user to see regulated healthcare data, but you wouldn't want your agency to see this data. So you would design that label for the regulated healthcare data, and then you would create the policy wherein your internal users can see it, but your agency users cannot. So here's the pattern that I think is kind of useful. By the way, if you're not doing this today, it's not too late to start doing it. Identify a few critical data categories, label them, write the policies, and connect those labels to the roles. Then you can decide whether those policies apply everywhere automatically, or if you want them to connect to just specific sandboxes. It just depends on your risk tolerance. That should give you a layered defense. So even if someone has a broad role-based access, ABAC can still prevent them from touching data that they shouldn't. And then over time, you can grow your label policy set as you start understanding risk better, your privacy policies better, and as your team matures. Okay, let me call out a few anti-patterns I see repeatedly. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who has seen this, but everyone is basically an admin. This happens a lot. And I get it. It's sometimes easier than having to go in and take the time to create and manage roles, but this will work until it doesn't. And then you have a lot of problems on your hands. So just like, don't do that. Avoid that. Everyone should not be an admin. And you don't want to have that one giant AEP admin role either. Like I said, it's convenient, but it's extremely painful later. So take the time to at least define 3 to 5 roles and then continue to add on later. Like I said, treating development like a safer production. This should be your place to experiment. Let it be disposable. Try things, run tests, and then don't wait too long to introduce ABAC. Retrofitting governance can be difficult. It's not impossible. So if you're not doing it, you should start. But like I said, you don't have to, label the whole world. Just start with, a few of the really important ones that you need, create the labels, create the policies, and then you can always add on later. Okay. So here's kind of a realistic adoption path, because I know this is a lot. And you might be thinking, oh, Sarah, it's too late. I've already stood up AEP. We've been using it for 3 years. It's not too late. It is possible to go back and start making the changes and the refinements. So this is what I personally went through, and this is kind of how I did it. We had set up what we thought was going to make sense for us in terms of roles. And we had to kind of go back and look at, no, actually, these are the different roles that we want to have. And then, so we kind of created those in the background, and then went through that with all of our users. Hey, our roles are going to be changing. This is what's going to happen. And then rolled that out, the new access model. So it's not too late. You can always change things. But like I said, it is a little bit harder to start pulling back the manage access and giving view access. So always start with more view. So here's kind of how I would do it. Baseline, just start inventorying. What product profiles you have, roles, sandboxes, what exists today? And then can you define something smaller or cleaner? Then kind of start to stabilize that, adjust based on real usage. Like watch what your users are using, what they actually need, what they're telling you they're missing, and start then introducing those labels and policies. And you can do that in a lower environment, test it out, see how it works. And then you can always, move those into production after you feel good about it. And then tighten up and manipulate the sandboxes as well. And then you can start to evolve once you get into a steady rhythm of reviews and you're watching your license usage and onboarding new regions or teams, expanding ABAC where it actually adds value. Okay, so to wrap up, AEP gives you a very rich access model, but your advantage doesn't come from toggling every option. It comes from turning that model into something people can actually live with. Remember your users, right? So if you get product profiles, roles, sandboxes, and ABAC working together, your day-to-day experience is going to improve dramatically. You're going to have a lot less mystery errors, fewer fire drills, safer experimentation. I mean, this is all, it's great for you personally. It's great for your organization. It's great for the business. So win-win-win. And if something does go wrong, now you're going to know where to look first instead of wondering, is the problem with data? Is it with permissions? Is it with the environment? So you'll have a better understanding of where to go. So I'm happy to dig into any specific scenarios or the we tried this and it hurt stories. Those are usually where the best patterns merge. So I'll leave some time for questions. And then if this was of any interest to you and you want to chat further, feel free to link in with me. I'm happy to kind of talk about this more offline.
Awesome job, Sarah.
Thank you.
I'm sure for a lot of us, this is a topic and theme that we all either are very close to or we maybe have horror stories about, right? I wanted to share quickly. There's some great documentation about the out-of-the-box product profiles on AJO specifically. Not all the products on the Adobe Experience Cloud have this out-of-the-box kind of documentation, but I think this is a great place to start for anybody that's looking at roles and permissions with, a blank page. It might get the gears going on, how to customize and maybe align on best practice a little bit. So I dropped a link in the chat for anybody that wants to dig into that further. But that was great, Sarah. Any questions for Sarah?
I think we got a few questions. One on the chat
Okay, great.
from Prithviraj.
Oh, that's interesting. My scroll's in reverse order, so sorry about that. Yes, there will be a recording of this. We can send out copies of the deck if you guys are okay with that. Can you please go back to AEP mental model slide and repeat the cues? Maybe if you can give us spark notes on that, Sarah, that might be helpful for Ravi.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
About the mental model slide.
Hang on, let me share my screen again.
And then Ravi, feel free to come off mute if you have a particular question around that. Hopefully the attendees can come off mute.
One moment while I pull that back up. Okay.
Oh, mic is disabled for me. Sorry about that. Do you know how to change that setting, Karthik? I thought that was enabled last time.
Mm.
Let me unmute you really quick, Ravi. Sorry about that. You could try now, Ravi, if you see a prompt.
Yes, Tom, I can.
Oh, great. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I think this is really helpful and it helps in understanding how to think about roles and permissions, in setting up for users in AEP. I really liked the cues that you used while defining the four tiles that you're sharing on the screen. Can you repeat that again? It just went right into my ears, and before I realized, you moved on to the next slide.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so these are the four building blocks, product profiles, roles and permissions, sandboxes, and ABAC. So product profiles decides who's allowed in, right? This is who's the bouncer at the club. Roles define what they can do. Sandboxes decide where they can do it. And then the ABAC is that extra filter around what data they can touch.
Thank you. This was exactly what I was looking for. Thank you so much.
Good. I'm glad that was helpful.
So there's another question from Prithviraj on the chat. Prithviraj, if you don't mind coming on mute to ask that question, I can put that back in Q&A as well.
Let's see. I gotta give him presenter mode. Apparently, try now.
Yeah. Hi. Thank you, Sarah. Wonderful presentation. I just have one question because I've been part of many of the launch of RDCDP AJO from both consulting as well as being an in-house architect standpoint, where I work with vendors from outside. What I've seen is during the discovery phase, most of the effort was mostly on delivering some use cases that are basic and low-hanging fruits.
Mhm.
But governance and attribute-based access control or object-based access control are topics that are never really part of the main theme, and it is kind of left behind as if like an afterthought and something maybe the legal will just give a sign off with whatever the Adobe advisory service. In reality, when you been representing GM, have you faced similar kind of experience, or your approach towards governance was different?
Well, because I am at such a large organization and we have to be so careful about how we're using our data, my marketers were already all over that. I was pretty lucky there. So when it came to like policies and labels, we kind of already had done a lot of that work in discovery. But I agree, like they're very focused on the campaigns and the audiences, but that's the question that you have to ask. Okay, now I understand who you want to talk to, but are there any restrictions around this data? Can it go to all of these platforms, or do we have to make sure that we're not sending certain things? We also had to do a lot of work as it pertained to like privacy and consent. So like opting out of targeted media, for instance, right? So that was something that we had been asking about as well as we're talking through these use cases, to ensure that if this data is coming in, do we have a way to make sure that anybody who did opt out of targeted media, that they're not going to the destination? We want to keep them in English, right? But we want to make sure that they don't go to the destination. So my advice is, I get it. The marketers want to do all this really cool stuff. Get those requirements and then ask, great, now, can we have all of this data in there? Are there any restrictions around how it's used? So that while you're doing that setup, you can start getting those policies in place without having to basically say, stop, slow down. We can't do any of this cool stuff that you want to do until we get the foundation set up. You can kind of do it at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I have a follow-up question because this is something I faced as like firsthand. In one of my previous employer, it was a Chinese behemoth, giant. So most of their operational activities, their IT development, were based out of China. Well, we are implementing RDCDP for our US market. So there were some confusions around the data residency. How do you manage in a global MNC where there are regional instances of the RDCDP? You can't just have one singular center of giving provisioning rights, because you have to democratize the provisioning. Otherwise, it will not be very scalable. Like, how was GM's model on that? I'm sure GM has other regional offices as well.
Right. Our data is pretty restricted here. So we actually have different production sandboxes set up for each region. So US has a region, Canada has a region, Europe has a region, because we need to make sure that we're not sharing certain data, not allowing certain data to be seen, but also like we all have different privacy and consent. So that allows us to make sure that we're applying that for the specific region and sandbox. So it can be done one of two ways, right? You can limit it by the sandbox, especially if that's more of a like regulatory issue. And then you can use policies and labels if it's more of a, it can all live together, just certain people can't see it or do something with it. So you have kind of the two options there. By the way, General Motors also has a sandbox for GM Financial, because we cannot commingle the financial data with the marketing data. So it wasn't that we could just apply policies. We couldn't have the data commingled at all. So we have completely different instances for AEP.
So just with the interest of time, I think we have maybe time for one more question. Amit, if you want to jump in.
Yeah. Hey, hi, sir. Amit here. Just a quick question. Definitely, the attribute-based permission is already there. Is there any roadmap to bring the row label permission, because considering the fan profile, I want to restrict some of the fans to be accessed by the different business group or business unit versus the attribute, because attribute is fine. The first name, last name, email address can be visible to all the business group, but I want to do the virtual partitioning of the fans as well.
So is the question, instead of applying the labels and policies to the roles that you have set up, you want to be able to do that based on
Predefined grouping on it, right? Maybe these fans belong to the German market, or these fans belong to the UK market, and do the virtual partitioning based on that. So if the marketers are coming, who is coming from the German market, they can see only the German fans, not the UK fans.
Oh, that's a really good question. I actually don't know if Adobe has that on their roadmap, but similar to the last question, I think you have a couple options here. You can do the consent, or I'm sorry, the policies and the labels. You can say that this is all German data, so it can only be seen by people with this particular role, and you might just have to be very clear about what that role is and what they can do. But truthfully, I think the best way to do this is to just have separate sandboxes. That way you keep the data clean, you keep it separate, and you don't have to worry about someone accessing data that they're not supposed to.
Yeah, that's already in place, but considering the licensing terms and everything, it
I get that. Yeah.
same times landed into each and every sandboxes, and managing so many sandboxes is very difficult. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Sarah. I think
Yeah, no problem.
information.
Great questions, guys, and great job, Sarah. Thanks so
Thank
much. We're gonna hand off from Sarah to Sarah here. So, Sarah Hanrahan, go ahead and kick it off with your content.
All right, let me just share my screen real quick. 1 minute. And put it in presenter mode. All right, since I can no longer see you, are you seeing the presentation still?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we're good. Thanks.
All right, making sure you're not seeing the other screen. All right, hi everyone. I'm really excited to be here to talk about AEP adoption. AEP adoption is one of the topics that I just absolutely love to talk about. So I might talk a little bit fast going through some of this, but I'll give you a little background on why I like to talk about it as we go through and why it matters, but I'm excited to at least get started. All right, real quickly, I'm going to do an intro, talk about why it matters. Sarah hit on some of the roles from a ABAC perspective. I'm going to talk about it from an organizational level. So there is a lot of crossover there, which is really good. Some training plans, measuring success, going through a potential workflow, and then some additional resources. All right, a little bit about me personally. I'm a director of MarTech solutioning, at Bounteous. I have been at Bounteous roughly 5 years, going on 5 years this year. I have done lots of multi-solution implementation projects, mostly focusing around AEP, AJO, CJ, but I have also implemented additional CDPs outside of the AEP stack. In my role as a director of MarTech solutioning, it's more higher level where you're looking at the entire ecosystem of the products together and how that fits into your existing MarTech stack. I have over 10 years experience working with Adobe products. So I started in Adobe Analytics and then moved into CDP, AJO, etc. I am certified in RTCDP and also part of the championship program. Prior to this, I have worked in corporate, running a global team that did Adobe Analytics and website content. And I was also an adjunct professor focusing on digital marketing. So yeah, kind of like this area of business. Okay, so why adoption matters. So I like this line because it's really saying that adoption is that bridge between investment and impact. Again, this topic is very important to me because I have seen lots of clients who get really excited about purchasing the product. They get it implemented, so they have their 3-6 month implementation plan, and then they're like, okay, we're ready to go. Our teams are ready to take it on. And then it kind of stalls. They're not really sure how to do it. Maybe they did some training. They thought they were ready. And then eventually the tool kind of stalls out a bit and no one's using it. And they're like, okay, it must be the tool. Rip and replace. We got to buy some new technology because it's not working for us. But really it is focusing on that adoption model of why the product actually matters to the organization and how it's going to be implemented across the organization is what really gives you that impact of the product. So as part of the adoption model, you have different parts of it. So when you get into what you want the organization to achieve, you want to start off at the beginning by defining who's going to be responsible at the beginning of the project or the implementation or owning these tools. Like Sarah mentioned, she's the product owner. And then you want to decide how those people are going to train up, how they're going to adopt it in their organization, and then the workflows they're going to use. So I'm starting with roles because that's kind of the foundational aspect, and then we'll go through a little bit more detail of how you can spread it across the organization. So again, the right roles matter. When you have the right roles defined, you have accountability. If ownership isn't clear, decisions stall. If governance isn't clear, then people aren't trusting the product. We saw that a lot with data. It's like the data's wrong or the product doesn't actually work. If outcomes aren't owned, again, value disappears. It's like, well, it must be the tool. It's not working for us. We need something new. So defining those right roles at the beginning of what people are actually going to do and how they're going to be responsible for the platform and its scalability across the organization is huge. So again, Sarah kind of talked about the same type of roles, so I'm glad we aligned there. But mine is going to be at more a higher level of having these roles inside of your organization. When you start the project or the implementation, when you bring on these tools, or even if you haven't done that already and you're backtracking, that's totally fine too. I've worked with clients on how they can add additional people to their MarTech stack or different roles inside the organization, or how they can get marketing team on board, or how they can get IT on board, writing job descriptions for clients, just so that way we can all be aligned on what people are going to be doing. So starting with the platform owner, again, it's a person who owns AEP. They're responsible for understanding what roadmap is out there, what the backlog is. They're coordinating across marketing, data, and IT. They're the champion. They're the ones who are doing the roles, what people have access to, the sandbox management, making sure that it is stable for the organization. Then you have the data steward or data governance person. This person really owns how to build inside the tool. So they're owning the schema, they're monitoring the data, they're enforcing consent, approvals, and structural data changes. So again, they're managing the data aspect of the platform. And then you have the business. The business is anyone from your business stakeholders to the users themselves. So I kind of lump them all into one role of just the business, but there is adoption marketing, which I'll add in later. But again, they're the people who are using the tool or requesting how the tool is going to be used for them. They're the ones who are responsible for their use cases, the requirements and success metrics for their business unit. They're partnering with your platform team on activation. They're deciding what use cases scale and when they retire. And they're also the ones who are potentially building audiences and platform. I put the asterisk there as the building in platform could go back to the tech team if you're not ready for your organization to go in there and start building their own audiences. You'd have to have some tight user permissions in there to make sure that they're not doing anything they shouldn't. But sometimes it's a little bit trickier to say like, yeah, my marketing team's going to go in and automatically start building audiences and pushing them out to their destinations, because there needs to be yet another level of governance on how people are using the platform, what audiences can be pushed to what destinations, even just having them in the tool. As you might know, as you've been in the tool, it's like if somebody new comes into the tool to try to build an audience, it's really hard to understand the data and the data structure if you aren't partnering with your IT team that's doing that. So that's why I put like an asterisk there. And then you have analytics and insights. I'm not just talking about AA or CJA in this aspect. It is really on everyone to kind of think through, how is this tool working? What's the health of the tool? And that's like, is the data accurate? What are our audiences and segments looking like? Are they successful? How can we reuse some of those audiences segments across the business that are successful? So it's really closing the loop with the business stakeholders on how is the tool itself working, but how individually campaigns are working as well. So it's great to define the roles, but like, how do you get there? What are some of the training needs, training capabilities that really matter? And how can people, so say you just purchased the AEP suite of products, or you've had them for a while and you're like, yeah, we do kind of need to structure around these types of roles, but how do I get my users ready for that? They have all kinds of other things that they're responsible for in our organization, and maybe just can't focus on just this platform. So I'm going to walk through some potential training plans that would help everyone get up to speed on the product pretty quickly and what they should be responsible for, so that you're not trying to have everyone have a deep understanding of the ins and outs of the tools. All right. So platform owner and developer, starting with that role. If you really look at the phase one, so you're just getting it, you're just getting into it, maybe you're new to the organization. In this role, you really want to spend the first few weeks of learning the tool, really diving into how does the AEP architecture and the core services work? What does out of the box look like? What do I have available to me, and how is it set up in my organization today? Looking at identity resolution and merge policies, which I know identity resolution Matt's going to talk about next. Looking at your sandbox structure. So again, the outcome here is that the developer can build the schema, and then they can start to validate that the profiles are working. So this is where you'd want to start focusing in on learning in the first few weeks. Then you become more into like the next phase, which is your core development. You're thinking about, okay, I understand how it's set up. How am I going to actually ingest the data and figure this out? So you got your understanding your data ingestion process, batch streaming. You're looking at your API integrations, your governance label and consent, and any troubleshooting you need to get to. And then with phase three, it's more around that optimization and scale. So you're able to understand debugging tactics, performance and ingestion optimization. You're doing QA, and you're looking at how you can scale the data architecture design to involve more data. So from a business, or we're going to call them right now the use case owner, because I will separate the business out. I know earlier I just called it business, but from a training plan, the use case owner within phase one, again, that foundational approach, they're looking at overall from a business lens, how does my AEP architecture look like? How do all my systems connect? You still need to understand that in order to be able to push outcomes. You're looking at the unified profiles and segmentation outputs, and you're also understanding the activation lifestyle. So again, how is this going to improve my business unit with my use cases? Phase two, you're really designing and activating. So you need to learn, what does it look like to translate the business needs into what AEP is capable of? So I understood in my foundations training that what AEP can and cannot do. Now I need to be able to translate my business needs into those capabilities. You're defining your KPIs for success so that way you know if I implement this use case or I'm going to do this campaign, this is how I expect it to work, and this is how I'm going to show value. That way I can prove that value out to be able to continue to use this and get priority on my needs as a business user. You're really thinking and partnering with platform and activation teams and understanding the overall activation workflows. Excuse me. And then in phase 3 is that measurement and scale. So you've already launched some, you're learning a little bit more about how this all works. You're thinking through, okay, I understand this audience is working really well, so I'm going to retire some of the underperforming initiatives. And you're looking at reviews and thinking through your next campaigns and use cases. So again, I said I separated it out. So business use case to activation marketing. So as a marketer, how can you better understand AEP? So your phase 1, your foundations is, again, the overview of AEP, but you're going to focus more around segmentation destination. How can this work for me? You also want to understand the activation lifecycle and a little bit about what are your guardrails. Phase 2, you're going to be diving into building the actual segments and tools and configuring the destinations. Phase 3, really training up on how to make your segments reusable, doing those templates, having that activation performance review, working with your analytics team to say, what is actually working? How can I reuse this segment? And how can other people in the business reuse this segment? That's the idea, right? You have all your audiences in one place in this tool. So you want to be able to empower other business units to be able to use them instead of, oh, we're building audiences in Meta, we're building audiences in CRM. So again, the idea of this tool is that you bring it all together and you all activate together as one business. And lastly, with analytics and insights, again, you got your foundations. So you're looking at identity stitching, data limitations and assumptions. With phase 2, you're learning a little bit more about what matters. You're validating data quality. You're looking at your KPIs. And then with phase 3, you're translating that data into action. So again, feeding the insights back into the actual segment, enriching your audiences, supporting outcome review, and establishing reoccurring reporting cadence. So when it comes to measuring success, so you've got your roles figured out, you know how you're going to train your teams or what they need to focus on in the beginning of their training. How are you going to know if all of this is working and that the adoption model is a success? Looking at it from like a 30, 60, 90-day approach. In the first 30 days, you're really just trying to get that foundation set. You're stabilizing it. You've got the core teams that are involved, the first use cases identified, the implementation team, like Bounteous, working with you, or just your teams identified. Your milestones here are your core teams are trained so that they can train other teams as needed. And you have some first wins. So you're showing your executives, this is how we're going to prove value across the organization. You're telling other business units, hey, here's how you can achieve your goals by leveraging these tools. And here's how this team did it. In the 30 to 60-day timeframe, you're really looking at adopt. You're building the habit and expanding the usage here. So your milestones are your increased segment and activation volume, and you've reduced platform team dependency. So by reduced platform team dependency, it means you're not relying on just the core team, like others know what they're doing too. And then in the 60 to 90 days, you're starting to scale it. You've got your standardized templates and playbooks. So new people come on board, you're like, here's where you can go to understand how this works. Here's your playbook. You're tracking adoption and your return on investment metrics. And your milestones are, it's already embedded in workflows. So when someone's thinking about, hey, I want to do this marketing campaign, they're thinking about, AEP tools, those are what I need to do in order to do this campaign. I don't need to bring on a different tool for my organization. Like, I know how it works in the platform that we have. You can also think of it from an adoption rate scorecard. So I know that there are in AEP ways to look at how the organization is adopting, like how much usage there is. You can look at if people have logged in, does that mean adoption? Well, that doesn't actually mean true adoption, it just means someone's logged into the platform. But there are ways to look inside the tool and understand who's using it and who's not. And so you can start to build out this scorecard to understand, like, hey, is my adoption model working? What else do I need to do in order to make sure that this is spreading across the business, it's scaling in the way that we want to? So you can look at your user adoption, you got your workflow adoption, your process adoption percentages, and your outcome adoption. So those are just high level like ways to think about like building out a scorecard. You could also do it from a horizon roadmap. Maybe you need to talk to the organization of, in these 3 phases or in this future outcome, this is how our organization is going to be able to scale the adoption of these tools. Here's our initial investment, here's how we started, and this is how we're going to spread it to really show that power and impact across that organization. So maybe in Horizon 1, you're thinking about enable and activate. You just want it stood up. You want the data in, you've activated some use cases, check the box and people are trained. Horizon 2, it's now embedded into the organization a little bit more, and it's expanding outward. So people are talking about it, they're showing off their use cases, they're showing the value, they're logging in, they're using the tool, however that may look. And then Horizon 3 is more that optimization and scale. It's like, what else can we do? How else can we empower the organization to really make sure that people are leveraging these tools? All right, so you got your team identified, you got your training models, thinking through those. You've got your adoption scorecard, your horizon map identified, how you're going to measure success. And now you got to think about, what does a workflow look like? So this one's really tricky, and one I would love to partner and talk with more about, because I think it's different every organization, and it should be, because it's got to be how it works for you. And I know it was different when I was on corporate side, but really thinking about, like, how can people use the tool, request to use the tool, get audiences built? Like, how does that look so that there's no bottlenecks into actually using the tool? So again, the importance of creating some kind of a workflow is it makes sure that your intake is clear. Like, here's what the business needs from me in order to make this tool used. Governance is already pre-built in, so you have that strategy already built in. And as part of the workflow, measurement is consistent. So if somebody is sharing out reporting, it's consistent to what everyone else is doing. So you have like your value framework set up. And then again, optimization is repeatable. So defining like a workflow. And what I mean by like workflow, and I'll go through an example here in a second, is really thinking about, like, somebody has a use case, how can they execute into AEP? Or there's a need for more data, or there's a need for a report. Like, how does that work? Okay, so going into that example. Sorry, I know I'm talking kind of fast, but I'm also trying to stay on time. So I'm almost done, I'm cruising through. Okay, so a framework could be, again, this is at its most basic level. So again, I'd love to talk more about, like, what would a good workflow actually look like, or like work in an organization. So intake, you have your intake model of some form. So the business submits their use case. They have this campaign that they're running. At that point, you're going to look at, is this a net new or an enhancement to the platform? Do I need more data? Does the data already exist? A lot of my clients are healthcare clients. So if the data is not already there, that means it's another legal review. So have they talked to their legal team? Do they need to be able to access that data? So that's a whole other level of getting what they need. Then there's the data review. You're validating the required data You're looking at making sure it fits into your schema alignment, and you're estimating the effort and timeline. This part I think is tricky because every team has their own estimate of effort and timeline. I know you probably all worked across different parts of the business. And marketing has a today or yesterday was my timeline, and IT's like, a couple months out will be fine. So like that you really want to hone in on and make sure that the business understands the effort that it takes to do this and everyone's aligned. Then there's a build and configure. You're adding that additional data or you're building that segment. And then activation and execution, you're testing, you're monitoring its performance, and then you're measuring it. Measurement's huge. Like, I cannot say that enough. I'm sure everyone here is a fan of CJA, AA, et cetera, or measuring anything. But I felt like that was often missed, where people are like launch and either sunset without actually documenting the learnings, but documenting the learnings in a way that other teams can leverage them as well. Okay. So we went through a potential workflow model. Now I want to just talk to you about some additional resources and ways that you can help your organization learn about the tools, where you yourself can go to learn more, and things that have helped me as I'm onboarding and learning some of the new aspects of AEP. So you have the Adobe certification program. In the certification program, what I find really helpful is that even if you don't take the actual certification, they have practice tests. And those practice tests are like real-life questions that would help you to realize like, okay, maybe I know a little bit about this. Maybe I need to dive more into this. But it also lays out the outline of what you need to learn from the documentation in an easier way to review it versus just going and trying to review documentation in the portal. So it kind of outlines it's like, okay, first you're going to learn about ingestion, then you're going to learn about audiences. So it keeps it more in that linear process, which works for me. So I just wanted to share that. You have your community forums, and you ask questions of others, and people can answer in real time. Which is then you also have your community league. In the community league there, you've got guides, tutorials, you got free courses inside a community league. Then there's the product documentation, which is the documentation I was kind of referencing that you can find in the certification program, you can find in the community portal, and you can find in Adobe AI Assist as well. And then AI Assist, if you haven't used it, it's one of my favorite tools. It allows you to understand how the tool came up with the answer, but you can click into sources and learn a little bit more about the documentation and dive deeper into that topic versus just getting the answer. And then I have linked here the certification link, the community page, and the free courses that are offered. And then there's some other paid courses as well, but at least just to get started, here's some options. And then lastly, talking a little bit about AI Assist. So if you haven't leveraged the tool, it's phenomenal. It's getting better all the time. But it's just really helpful if you have a question specific to your instance, or if you have a general question, then it can pare down into like you finding that documentation faster than trying to search for it in the documentation library. At least from my experience, I start here, it's a lot faster. They have prompt libraries. Your organization might be writing your own prompt libraries. I know we are, because as our clients start to like understand how to use AI Assist, having like a way to properly ask it questions is helpful. And so we also are creating our own to assist with that. And again, I mentioned that you can click on source and then get to that documentation a lot faster if you want to go in and read deeper level than what is provided in AI Assist. And then that last box over there is you can dive into the specific platform. So if you're like, how do I build an audience? But you really want to know documentation around how do I build an audience as it relates to Journey Optimizer, you can select that. So you're getting the documentation based on the actual product that you're in that you want to learn more about. All right, that's it for me. We can go to QA, and you can also share stories what has worked for you or sob stories of things that you wish you had done in organizations, or how organizations should have worked, because I understand that too.
So I hate to be strict. I think we're going to have time for one question. If you guys do have questions, though, please feel free to use the Q&A chat. I just approved
Stefan is
Stefan on the line for our.
Do you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
we do.
It is I, once again, here with the philosophical question. So a bit of background. I'm from Canada, and over here we don't have as many Adobe Experience endowments, if I were to call them that, as in the US. And one of the challenges, and I think that your training plan is really great in the sense that you have this whole package of everything, right? You want to have your governance. You want to have the people doing analytics. You want to have the people doing marketing. The challenge that I have is that over here in the North, what tends to happen is a lot of firms outsource their marketing to agencies. And what tends to happen is, because I believe it's a lot more effort to be Adobe certified than, say, being Meta or Google certified and whatnot. What tends to happen is there's not a lot of Adobe presence, and that tends to sort of draw customers away from Adobe. Is there a way moving forward that agencies can sort of specialize their staff into Adobe, or are businesses just better off sort of internalizing I guess, their marketing section, their marketing functions inside the business if they want to use Adobe products?
I think it's a yes and type of answer for that. So I have worked across multiple different clients that have a person of one to a full team, right? So I totally understand that, oh my gosh, this is too big for the small team I have. I'm overwhelmed. And these tools aren't right for me to, okay, yeah, we can add more resources potentially or whatever. So I guess it just really depends on what works for your organization. If outsourcing does make sense, or that's the model that you do, then you could find teams that specialize in Adobe or have worked on Adobe products. I wouldn't say that in order for it to work, you have to bring it all in-house. My thinking around doing an adoption model for inside organizations was, we often get that when people buy the products, they're like, we want you guys to help us implement, and then we're going to take it on ourselves. So if that is the case, where they're like, we're going to fully take it in-house after, just train us how to do it, this is how we would want to at least start the foundational setup for you to be able to do that. So that way later on, you don't blame the technology because people aren't using it or don't understand it, or you come back to us, which is great, or you come back to your partner, your agency partners, or you find somebody else who can do it. So, it really, I guess it's a hard question. I think it would work either way. It's just what you have the resources to be able to do in your organization.
Yeah,
We
what,
do
what
it.
tends,
Yeah.
what tends to happen here is that the boutique shops tend to handle Google, and then the bigger firms tend to handle Adobe. But what tends to happen is, because of the track right now, you have somebody that does RTCDP, you have somebody that does AJO, you have somebody that does CJ. There's a lack of, I guess, a bundle having everything together, because I do think that AIP's biggest strength is that once you have the whole machine running, right, the parts are bigger than the sum of themselves, right?
Yes, I would agree with that. Nothing more to offer than solidarity in that everyone should, if we could figure that out as a whole. Because you're right, if you're pushing off the audience then to a different agency who's managing Meta, that learnings might not be coming back into your organization. So
the other issue is that agencies here, I don't know how it is in the US, they're kind of hot seats. So what happens is that you have a lot of turnover, and that I think that Adobe knowledge is a lot more difficult to keep internal, because I've been a lot of the agency side. It's very difficult to keep that knowledge internal.
mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree
That
with
was
that.
my philosophical question. I know it's a hard one.
It's a good one.
This is a good
very good one.
Adoption is a tricky topic to navigate, right? I'm sure we're all familiar with different scenarios based on different orgs. I think it's a good springboard into your conversation, though, Matt. Maybe moving from, the framework and the groundwork on roles and permissions from Sarah Masters.
Yeah.
We got adoption now from Sarah Hanrahan, and we're moving into some more advanced stuff with Matt. So, Matt, go ahead and kick it off. I'm mindful of time here. We're probably going to be right up against 5 o'clock, but
Yeah, I'll
take your full slot. We're recording this, so
you got it. In the infamous words of Spaceballs, I will do the short version. Okay.
Okay.
I'm kind of dating myself a little bit there. So I have one confession to make. I didn't make a brag slide. I totally forgot, but that's okay. So I'm not
Give
going to
us
brag
your
about
elevator
myself
pitch.
a lot, right? Yeah, hold on. Right. So hold on. So, and I am awful at PowerPoint, but that's a different story for a different day. So let me get into the right mode here. So really not that awful at PowerPoint. I think that's mean, but here we go. Okay. So secondary transitions though, so I'm good at something. All right. So what we're going to talk about over the next consolidated 25 minutes or so is AJO, as far as data identity, governance, and more importantly, activation framework. It's kind of funny that the conversations that we've been having and that I've been hearing, I'll give you my little brag slide. I has started with my first AEP journey, started at a telecom company about 11 years ago. We were one of the first AEP implementations. So I have seen the evolution of AEP from one of the first implementations. And in that time frame, I have worked on a lot of different AEP implementations. My primary roles and responsibilities have been everything from principal architect all the way down that role chart to setting up CJA analytics for e-com businesses. I am currently in the pharmaceutical space and the service business and working in those areas. So I have seen it all, heard it all, and know where a lot of the, how do I put this, challenges lie. And what I kind of want to do is talk at a high level today about AJO and third-party integrations and getting your data in and getting your data out. But I want to keep it at a high-level type framework rather than getting into specifics. I will answer any specific questions you have in the QA. I know the API as well. I'm a developer at heart, but an architect these days by practice. So what we're going to talk about really is kind of 4 or 5 key topic areas. Data pipelines. We got to cover governance. This is a governance call. Identity, which is everybody's favorite topic with an AEP, because day one comes and then you realize you really didn't have as strong identity as you thought you should have. Analytics. It's kind of funny. Every single one of these roles things, we kind of skipped over CJA. And that's just something that you find a lot in implementations of AEP, right? We'll focus on the RTCDP and then we'll do AJO and then it's, oh no, we forgot to do CJA. And CJA kind of suffers that role towards the end, but CJA plays an important role with AJO as far as reporting and measurement and that type of interactions. And then suppression, everybody's favorite topic these days. I have worked on about 4 projects in the last 3 years, and each and every single time suppression is like top of line, right? Let's talk about opt-ins, opt-out, regulatory alignment, preferences, updates, whole 9 yards. I've worked on everything from amusement parks to pharma, and suppression is one of those fun things. And you kind of have to think about suppression when you're in the beginning of the journey as much as in the middle of the journey, right? When you build out your journeys, these are really kind of the key elements that you're thinking about when you want to import and export data and kind of align with AJO in building out your journeys. All right. So best practices, right? Identity first. Can't say it enough, right? Namespaces, unified identity, ECID, CRM, email, phone, right? What is our identity? That identity is a crucial ingredient to any AJO journey because it is what is going to carry forward both your event and your profile data as well as any lookup tables you have, right? And yes, I know you can't bring lookup table, but whatever you have has to have an identity first. I have seen so many times folks come about and think that they have a great identity first strategy, and then that the third-party data set comes in that doesn't have the variable that you're looking for, or it doesn't have the data in the right order, or it's mislabeled, and it's like, oh my God, what do we do now? So when you're talking about this stuff, what your baseline has to be is that you need a durable identifier in the beginning. And what I mean by a durable identifier, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as we progress along here, is an identifier that is unique to your organization and doesn't change. I was working with a client a few days ago, and they were so super excited that they thought they came up with a durable identity. And then they realized, well, that identity actually changes and it isn't so durable. So it's now, well, we have these winners and these loser profiles because they built out this whole system that created winners and losers. And it was like, well, what do we do now with these loser profiles? Because they have data attached to them, and we have these winner profiles and they have data attached to them. So that's why there's this criticality behind identity first. We have to make sure that whatever identifiers we use are durable and they can last across the entire organization. The next thing is ingestion strategy, right? How are we triggering these events? How are we triggering these journeys? Are we triggering these journeys for real-time edge, trigger injection, or is it batch ingestion? And, the ingestion strategy with AEP and AJO is kind of just as political as it is practical. I think sometimes there's these two schools of thought. You have that one school of thought that is everything should be on the edge, right? We paid for real-time CDP, so thus everything needs to be real-time CDP. And then you look at what the journey is, and the journey is to send an email out within 30 hours of a product being purchased, or 15 minutes after being a purchase of a product. Did you really need real-time triggering for a batch, something that could have been done every 24 hours in batch ingestion, right? Or batch segmentation. We have to look at that. We have to understand that with our ingestion strategy, because if not, what's going to happen, and I saw somebody on this call that probably knows this just as well as I do for a particular client that we both were at. If you do everything batch, you might remember, batch ingestion is secondary on AEP's API streaming. Real-time ingestion always has a higher priority than batch ingestion. So if you're batch processing a lot of records, sometimes things backlog and cause issues. Dave Ross is laughing right now, by the way. You just don't know that. So in any event, schema alignment, XDM is appropriate for activation, right? So schema alignment, we got to make sure that our XDM schemas are in line and they look excellent. And what I mean by that is you don't want over complex schemas. I was working on a client that had multi-tiered schemas with integrated array structure. So they had literally batched arrays. One thing you never want to do in AJO is have a batched array, right? You want your schema design to be very succinct, very flat. Keep it flat. It'll make your AJO journeys more easy. If you have to do things like Kafka ingestion or Event Hub or things along those lines, keep that in mind too, because you're going to want to make sure that that data can be easily read and easily accessible. Latency awareness, right? Again, goes to timelines. Batch versus edge. What are your requirements? What are the refresh cycles? If you're processing 20 million records and you're doing it on a 24-hour period, make sure that that job kicks off after that batch process is completed and not during it. As well as governance, right? I'm in the pharma space right now. Governance is key here. There are certain things that we got to keep an eye on with governance, because governance in AEP is a very, very complex thing, right? We make policies and procedures seem simple, but keep in mind that there are out-of-the-box policies and there are custom policies, and they follow two different governance models, right? Or two different coding models. Keep in mind what Boolean logic you have. Does Boolean work? What about null values? We have to make sure that when we look at our labels and our policies, that they are in line for effective export. So when we talk about security methodology, building on that, we talk about labeling, right? We want to make sure that downstream users can't see our data. And we've really gone into that a lot this evening, so I'm going to kind of skip over a little bit. But policy enforcement is important, right? And then we have our rules-based access control, consent enforcement, right? So 2 levels, another level here is consent enforcement. We have our third-party CSM systems or consent management systems, CMS. So like if we're using OneTrust or Cookie or Cassandra or something along those lines, we have to make sure that that consent and those opt-in and opt-out rules are also being followed and also being applied. And we also finally want to make sure that whatever data we are transporting is secure in the sense that when it's coming into a third-party connector or going out of a third-party connector, that we understand what that data is and how that data interacts with the systems. All right. So then we got CJA, right? So we got our journeys, we have, our data, and then we have CJA. So as you probably know, and if you don't know, it's okay too. CJA does not follow the same rules when it comes to identity and namespaces as RTCDP. Dependent upon what version of CJA you either have field-based stitching or graph-based stitching. And they are different, right? One stitches at a field, one stitches at an identity graph type of level. That is not the same as your identity graph in RTCDP. And a lot of people, a lot of large companies screw up on that because they're so used to having spent so much time in RTCDP building out this awesome profile and this awesome identity graph. They get to CJA and it's like, well, why isn't it stitched together now? So it's important to make sure that we're maintaining our identity graph through CJA as well. So as well as event harmony and profile harmony. Remember, profiles and events are separate. They aren't going to stitch together automatically. They need to stitch together through either graph-based stitching or event-based stitching. I'm sorry, field-based stitching. So, it really comes down to that thing we talked about in the beginning, a durable identifier that can carry forward through each and every single step of your AEP journey. Stefan, when you were talking about Canada and there were people that are RTCDP people that are AJO people, and people that are CJA people, we have the same problem in the United States. Don't worry, right? You have subject matter experts in each field. But what generally happens is there isn't a subject matter expert that kind of sits over top that says, hey, what we did for RTCDP, we need to carry forward into AJO and need to carry forward into CJA, because they're often looked like as 3 separate products, where they really are all about journey orchestration and journey unification, right? Bringing everything together, which brings us to cross-channel visibility. We want to make sure that whatever we have, whatever we build, is unified across all touch points. And expect, people will tell you reporting is real time, but I think any of us that have been in this long enough know that no reporting is even real time. I remember a couple of weeks ago, I was hearing somebody complain that it took 15 minutes for ECID to validate over, hedge. Okay, yeah, well, it takes time, right? So it really depends. Have that expectation. Adobe marketing is awesome. Adobe is a great product, but not everything you hear your salespeople tell you is true. So, keep in mind your real-time reporting expectations aren't always going to be affiliated, right? So we spoke about the durable ID, and the slide's kind of out of order a little bit, and I apologize, but it comes back to the full circle, right? And I am a big proponent of durable IDs because they are critical to each and every step of an AJO journey and each and every step of third-party integration into that AJO journey, as well as governance, as well as profile, because it's really what is going to define your overall experience and your overall capabilities and successful implementation of the AEP stack. So make sure we have a primary identifier. It's okay to have a secondary identifier. I was working with a company that was wanting to use for their primary identifier the ECID. Yes, we all could be scared now. But the truth of the matter is the ECID is not a primary identifier for one very important reason. You could have multiple ECIDs. ECID is not the cure-all, right? We want to make sure that we have that dependable customer identifier, an authoritative identifier, and a durable identifier for every single journey we have. And I know I'm preaching to the choir, and it's not as simple as it sounds, because if it was, we all would be having a lot less gray hair, right? We also want to make sure that we have decent secondary identifiers. ECID is a secondary identifier, but so is email. Some people will say email is a primary identifier until the user changes their email address. A person could very easily change phone carriers, right? Loyalty IDs. Good God. Do you know how many loyalty IDs I have for particular brands? Right? My wife has one. I have one. Those are not your primary identifiers. Those are your secondary identifiers. Your primary identifier does not change. And if it changes, then it isn't a primary identifier. And we shouldn't be labeling them as such. Transient cookies, right? Namespace conflicts, midstream ID changes. We just spoke about all those. And define presence and conflict resolution on merge policies, right? I don't want to get into too much detail on merge policies because I'm trying to keep our time here. But think about it this way. If we have a solid primary identifier, our solid durable ID in our third-party journeys, and even our first-party journeys, we would be able to not have that many conflicts as far as merge policies go, right? They could have nice, clean, unified journeys. So just something to keep in mind. Preaching to the choir, I know. All right. In any event, principles, use case alignment. These are key here, right? These are the things that keep us up at night. We want to make sure we design journeys with requirements in mind. And one other thing I'm going to say about that is journey reusability is not a bad thing. Right. A lot of folks think that in order to build a good journey, you have to start all journeys from scratch. Let me ask all my e-commerce friends one question. On transactional journeys, things that we're sending out transactional emails, why can't we use content fragments and build out one journey that handles multiple transactional events? Right? We could reuse our journeys. We have to get into the mindset. Remember, we got a 50 event hardcore cap on journeys. We have restrictions up the wazoo on journeys, and there are reasons for that. I don't think that and remember, out of the box, AJO is 100 journeys until you beg and plead to get more, right? It's kind of like that sandbox question. Is 5 sandboxes actually enough? I won't even tell you how many sandboxes my current client has. All right, so behavior versus profile separation, right? Is our event data, do we have profile data in events, right? A lot of us do, because when we're building out our profiles in the beginning, and when we're building out our schemas in the beginning, we find ourselves in this position where we try to keep everything down to one schema. We build out this huge, super awesome schema. And that goes where I was talking about earlier in the conversation. I'm trying to keep myself on time here. Where we were earlier in the conversation about non-complex and non-array clustered schemas, right? So if we break them down and keep them similar and smaller, we're able to interact and build out better journeys because things are easier to find. Our events are separated and our profile attributes are separated. Because here's the truth. The complexity of web personalization will only increase over time. We have consent management, opt-in, opt-out strategies, rules and regulations coming in day out, third-party system integrations, new devices, right? The simpler we could create our event data, the easier it will be for us to build better journeys. Our profile is just that. It's a profile. It's designed to be the baseline that everything else is stitched to. And then that helps us avoid redundancy. I have seen so many profiles in my time and so much event data in my time that you could look at 3 separate tables and they have the same exact fields. Why? Because they're reusable. They don't need to be reusable. If we had a durable ID, it'll be a lot easier to make it happen. Destination validation, right? Do we really want that third-party system to have access to our data? Right? Because remember that data export is controlled at the data set level for profile schemas, not the schema level. So destination validation becomes important, as well as governance labels. You have to have governance. I have been, as I said, across a lot of different stacks and a lot of different platforms. And one key thing that I find is that the organizations that really implement AEP well and utilize it well did governance early, did data validation early, and did policies early. And most importantly, they thought of AEP as the whole stack, not just as RTCDP, then AJO, then CJA. Because if you think of it that way, you're never going to have cross-platform integration because you're going to have built it out in a stacked approach. So let's wrap up here with opt-out and list suppression modeling, right? So this is a key one here, and this one plagues a lot of us, right? Because we are in this world where people add new governance every single day, legal policies change weekly. I am in the pharma space right now, and I am dealing with FDA restrictions, HIPAA restrictions. I didn't even know there were FDA restrictions, state restrictions, local government restrictions, right? So for centralized consent, there should be a schema within AEP, within RTCDP, for that consent modeling with Boolean values. Easiest, quickest way to do it. You got your durable ID and you have all your consents. This way, boom, they hit it, it goes, it updates, right? And then you can build out microservices and whatever else you want, right? What are your channel preferences? Understand that the more flex, you need consent centers these day and age, right? We need kind of like this preference center. I think that the next great add-on for AEP would be some sort of preference management center or some sort of screen that allowed us to more easily integrate privacy controls at the email, SMS, push, paid media, the infamous direct marketing channels, right? To allow us to do that at a better rate. Real-time updates, right? We have to meet our requirements and so on, as well as, you know, universal suppression and GDPR, CCPA kind of stuff. So final slide, I promise. Kind of going through the framework here, right? We have to look at our governed ingestion, the durable identifier, schema, policy enforcement, CJ insights, and suppression controls. I don't know how much time I have because I switched to a full screen view. I'm going to stop sharing and I'll take some questions if you have some time.
You're good on time, Matt. That was pretty much perfect.
I'm sorry. I kind of went quick there.
We went 5 minutes past 5, but I think
all everybody left.
If we're here at this point, we're in it for the long haul. Yeah. Any questions anybody has? I didn't see any in the chat, but
I confused everybody. I apologize. That's why you never asked.
I think it's a lot of themes and topics that we're all either living live or you know, a lot of the insight maybe is preventative. So I think it's really valuable regardless. Go ahead, Stefan.
I got a question for the group, and this is something that's kind of I've been thinking about a lot over the last few days. Do you think that AEP is a developer tool or a marketing tool?
Both.
I mean, that one is like keeps me up at night.
You got to think about how you how it's framed, right?
Right.
Both.
You guys made me think about that more when I was talking. Well, Sarah's fault. Both
So-
of Sarah.
So hybrid, yeah.
Yeah.
So
And
silly
8
question.
weeks for training, Sarah.
That was just like a guide. It could take longer.
Weeks to build a journey. I mean, come on.
I don't know if you saw my reply there, Matt, but I kind of
I did see your reply to the AI bot,
one of the
but I was
slides,
going to I was going to reply back. But what if your company doesn't allow for AI because they don't have an AI policy?
That happens a lot. And the
That's
8
real
weeks was more just, I almost removed the weeks too. Was back and forth on that. I'm like, I don't want people to get hung up. But that was just showing the face.
Well, if there's no additional questions, first of all, thank you guys. This is great.
There was a question. Yeah.
Yes. Matthew, do tell us about the loyalty ID stuff, because that's been a trend here for the past year, and people wanting to plug their loyalty IDs as being a primary identifier. I think we lost Matthew.
Oh, maybe
He's
we did.
frozen, huh?
He froze
Yeah.
up, yes. Oh, there he goes.
Why don't you reiterate that question, Stefan, and
Yes,
maybe we
well,
can
I
tag
would
team
like
it.
to know how loyalty ID is not a good primary identifier, and what some of the common pitfalls are, because I've run into some of them.
I would say, I mean, just to take a stab at it, it's going to depend on. I think from Matt's lens, it's very client by client specific. If you're working within a singular org and you have one loyalty provider, I think that's a scenario where you have a little bit more safety net in being able to use a loyalty ID as your primary identifier. Whereas it kind of sounded like what Matt was alluding to is when you have multiple loyalty pieces to factor for, right? So which one becomes the source of truth on what is a quote unquote ID, or the primary ID for that matter? You know, if I interacted with this piece of my loyalty program most recently, am I now recognized as that as my profile? Or, you know, I don't know, some other loyalty piece behind the scenes is like, oh yeah, I haven't seen you in 3 years. So I think that's probably what he was alluding to, because at least for my familiarity, a lot of like Adobe clients are going to have one loyalty provider, but there's also argument that that's not necessarily always the case.
Well, I think the issue too is that, like at least in my case at General Motors, you can own a vehicle, you can have OnStar, but you don't have to have a loyalty account. So if you never signed up, we have no way of having an identity for you. But then we also see that kind of many to many issue too, wherein a husband and wife could share or an account, or I forgot that I had one, then I signed up for another one, and now I have two.
That's what I was going to say, Sarah. A lot of my clients see that is how many loyalty cards do they actually have, because they just kept getting more. So
In a previous
it's
life,
tricky.
in a previous life, I had a scenario where ECID was being explored as the primary identifier, and couldn't do that because one of the surfaces was kiosks, right? What happens when I show up to a kiosk and then the next person shows up to the kiosk and the kiosk is recognized as the same ECID, right? So can't have that. So I think a lot of scenarios were like bubble up for that for all different channel types and all different use cases.
So
Good question, though.
Tom. Yeah, well, I try getting involved and sort of writing down my questions, and I usually keep to one or two. When I go to Adobe Summit, I get to be a little bit more pointy. Now I'm the person who shows up at the microphone. It's like, oh no, not this guy again.
I think you should get your microphone to the summit. That's really
I'll be
cool.
at Summit, so I would love to see you at the microphone.
That's why I have to see if Blue Acorn sends me, though. We'll see.
Well, this was great, guys. For folks that will be at Summit, maybe we'll have like a mini reconvene of some kind, and what we'll do on the posting side of this, we'll get surveys out for the attendees. It'll also go out to the folks that weren't able to attend, and then we can kind of circle back with you know, recording and marketability on this session in particular, but thank you guys so much on the speaker side of things for dedicating your time. Sarah, and Matt already left, but he'll see the recording. Karthik, any final remarks?
All good. Thanks, thanks Tom. Thanks everyone. So if there were any questions that were unanswered, maybe we could shoot that over to you.
Yeah, I think as far as I know, I think we caught them all.
Okay.
But if there are any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to us, guys. And thanks again for a great virtual session.
Thanks for having
Thank you
us.
so much. Yep. Bye.
Take care, everybody.